Justinian becoming the leader of the eastern side of Christianity. And in him doing so, he wanted to put together Rome, Christian faith, and Greek philosophy. He was trying to get all three of them all smushed together, which automatically is going to cause a problem. So Satan has a little program here that he calls, if you can't cut the water off, muddy it. And that's pretty much what he does here. The gospel is going to get so diluted by all the other items, philosophy and Roman law, that it's going to be tough to come up with a real solid doctrinal program, okay? And the problem you have with any of these guys that get to the top, we saw that before, they're all in their head, they're legends, okay? This guy actually said, I have outdone Solomon with the rebuilding of Constantine's temple. Well, you know, where's it at now? It hardly exists. So understand that they were always in this vein. They were always trying to make themselves up and everybody else pay attention to them. All right? So you can see here where the early church considered itself a body, a living organism, new people, completely incompatible with any other people or any natural community. That is something from the very get-go. At the beginning, nobody wanted to be around Christians, so it wasn't tough to do that. But now they're trying to inculcate them into all parts of society because it's kind of like the going and blowing thing to do. Well, it dilutes the church, and anytime Satan can dilute the church, he's done a good job with history. That's all there is to it. Conflicts are going to arise again about the icons, which is nothing new, but as we come through, you'll see that they had a problem. They could use them for certain things, but not everything. And then the image breakers, which is an iconoclast, well, they wanted to replace them with the cross, the book, the Bible, and the elements of the Lord's Supper, or the holy items. There are people that start collecting things because they knew that they would go away and they wanted to hang on to them, just like now, antiques, okay? But at any rate, so you can see there different battles are going to go on between saints and angels and all this kind of stuff. Doctrines and practices of the East and West drifted apart. What started out as a common church, a Catholic universal church, is now pretty much East and West. And as far as I know, it'll never get back together until Christ comes back. I don't see it coming together. They tried a couple times, looked good a couple times, didn't pull it off. You jump forward a little bit. In 1453, Constantinople falls to the Islamic Turks. 11 centuries and the Christian Empire was at an end. So you can see we're in the 5s to 6s now. It took all the way to the 1400s for Christianity to wither away. But it was just small little pokes and pags. That's all they did. That's how they took care of it. Now you see for that particular period of time, there was no emperor, so they started looking to patriarchs for leadership. Anybody that was high up in the church, they'll look for that. Here's the deal. All these people all tried to tie themselves back to Rome in some fashion. This little trivia thing here that you see. Russia thinks Orthodox Christianity is its own. This is Moscow now, okay? Moscow became the leader of the Orthodox world. So what we know as Russia today was the head of a church. And it functioned, okay? But in theory, Rome, Italy fell to the barbarians, Catholic heresy. Second Rome, Constantinople, fell to the Turks. And the third Rome, Moscow, emperor took the title from the first Rome, which is why you have a czar in Russia instead of Caesar. Orthodox Church stands with the onion domes pointing towards heaven. So you know what they did. They made all the pretty little, all the churches all have those little onions on top, because they wanted to have them all, and every one of them's beautifully put together, gorgeous, but it was all show, okay? Now, here's what, once they get themselves established in this vein, the next thing they need to do is start taking care of the barbarians that keep sweeping in from the north, all right? Now, they had to evangelize them, so they had to evangelize the Vandals, the Franks, the Angles, the Saxons, the Goths, the Lombards, the Burgundians, and all the other ones that are out there. And you have to understand, these are clans. These are not religions, okay? So, and what they did is, they just come, as they would sweep down, they would send a couple of people back with them that had been conquered, okay? Just like they did when they tore the temple down and scattered the church. It sent people everywhere. When somebody came in and conquered somebody, they took somebody home with them. Well, when they took them home with them, they took a mindset home with them, and they didn't realize it, okay? Now, these guys, the Germans are probably the ones that probably worked the best. They saw Christ as the firstborn creature, a glorified warlord. Why? Because these are all warring clans. Anything that had to do with war was just absolutely wonderful to them, okay? So, in 325, the Visigoths, first to be evangelized, the Bible translated into Gothic language with the exception of the Book of Kings. Now, why? I put that in there just so you can see. Why would you not put the Book of Kings in a group that worships kings? Not too hard to figure out. You get them all cranked up. This is the book we want to follow. What are those guys doing in Kings all the time? Going out killing people. So they would have been happier than pigs in slop if they could get that book in there. And it worked. So they just left it out. All right, now you've got Patrick, a missionary in the 5th century. Now, converts under Clovis from 481 to 511, the first barbarian chief to become Orthodox Christian due to a marriage to a Burgundian princess named Clothilda, okay, who was a Christian. Now, you have to understand something. Most of the kings that go down, go down doesn't sound good when you're being saved, okay? Most of the kings that come to Christ because their wife was a Christian, okay? I don't know whether that's I don't know whether they nagged them into it, whether they just worked at it, whether they were functioning Christians, but almost every time there was a wife that was a Christian, and then a king became a Christian along with it, and then he could impose that belief system on all of his clan, all right? So, here's one of the deals. You can see how the first child was baptized, died in his baptismal robes. That's always good for the way to start your Christianity. Second child was born, baptized, fell sick. But Clovis, the baptism caused it, and Clovis prayed, and the child recovered. Clovis was not sure about the belief system, but in losing battle, he cried out to Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, to give him victory, and he would be baptized. Now, there's a problem with that little program. I mean, it's bargaining. What was the movie where the guy was swimming in the ocean? Was it Burt Reynolds in the ocean? And he was bartering with God about what he would do if he made it back to shore. Well, it's the same type of deal, the barter system. All right. But at any rate, you can see with this, the bishops come along to be baptized, adds one item: renounce all other gods. Now, do you know what that means to a clan that has gods at every corner? That's tough. That's like Paul going into Corinth. Okay, that's the problem that you've got. So, at any rate, once he crossed the line, got baptized, with his baptism, 3,000 of his army followed him in baptism. Okay, now I don't know how many of them actually accepted Christ, but when your Lord and leader does it, you do it. So that's where they are. Now, who do barbarians that come to Christ admire? I put that in there just out of curiosity. Any clue? There's a term in the Gospels called Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Am I correct? Once they saw that, they were all into Jesus. Why? What was the Lord doing? Ruling everything. What was the king doing? Ruling everything. They thought this was their ticket to the big house. Okay, so that's what they were doing. Now, here you got a bunch of saints working out now. The saints came about. You have to understand from what we said before, if you died, you had the opportunity to become a saint. Only if you died through martyrdom. All right? So, yeah, military, one, St. George, St. James, they were against Islam, of course. Special saints, St. Anthony, if you had pigs, you had to have that one. St. Gall, care for the hens, that's Kevin's, okay? All right? That's the little medal he wears around his neck, okay? Apollina, jaw broken in persecution, cured the toothache. Okay, so you had that one. If you had a toothache, you put that one on. St. Genevieve, cured fevers. St. Blase, sore throats. Every human had some way to find a saint to fix something that they had going on. Okay, so I'm pretty sure they're going to wear out their welcome after a while, but at any rate. So I stuck this little section in here. Pay attention to in England about Pope Gregory and sending Augustine, a Benedictine monk, but you have to understand, everybody and their uncle picked up the name Augustine, so this was Augustine number 622 or something, all right, along the way. It was just truckloads of Augustines. So that's what it worked out. But at any rate, they sent him over to talk to a queen, and a queen was eager to convert her pagan husband. Once again, the same scenario. Queen gets saved, husband gets saved. All right? And in doing all this, persuaded grant lands for the monastery of Canterbury. Gregorius appointed Augustine the first archbishop. So what happened is Augustine went over, did his little barter thing. The queen's husband was saved, so he got a pile of land to put a monastery on. I mean, it was the royal quid pro quo, okay? I mean, that's just how they did business all the time. Big problem of the day in that century, point of dispute. Here's a big one. Easter. What day was it? That's all they had to wrestle about right then, okay? So they worked with it, and here's how it came to be fixed. The Celtic advocate appealed to the authority of Columbia, which was some god they had, the Roman to Peter, okay, to whom Christ gave the keys. It is really so. Does Peter guard the gates of heaven? Well, that was the question there, but here's the deal. The guys from Columbia said they promptly resolved to take no chances of alienating the doorkeeper of heaven. Okay, so Peter's side won, because they were afraid if they won, they wouldn't get into heaven. So weird stuff takes place. Now, you've got this other guy going on. Most famous British missionary of the Middle Ages was Winfrid. His name was changed to Boniface, Monk Boniface, commissioned by Pope Gregory to evangelize Germany and secure ties with Rome. Boniface, very devoted to the cause and successful. But the bee in the bonnet was early failure in the Netherlands drew him back prior to commissioning. He sealed his faith with martyrdom in 754, as generally supposed the young Frankish Prince Charles, who was destined to become the Emperor Charlemagne and architect of the new Christian Europe, was 12 years old at the time. And what happened was he saw this gentleman get martyred. Okay? And when he saw him martyred, it did something to the young man. So it stayed with him all the way till he became the guy with the crown. All right? So you can see that what he was going to try to do is get rid of all the garbage going on in Europe and put Europe back together as a Christian entity again. He felt that he was called to do that. Okay, so the church is going to take the lead in this. And it says here, in beginning under Charlemagne in the 8th century, which is the 700s, but the Pope slowly assumed more and more power until the Pope Innocent III, all the way up to the 1200s, taught Europe to think of popes as world rulers. So they're always trying to get together with a king or somebody to stay in a position of authority. All right? Now, in 590, Rome was in agony, so you've got something going on in Rome just like going on in the world now. Flood, war, plague, sore throat, black eruption, swift death, carts piled with corpses. People went insane. Rome became a desert. Pope Pagalius II died screaming in agony. That's not really a good thing for the commoner to see, okay? The Pope to be belly aching out on the balcony type thing. For 6 months, no Pope ruled at St. Peter's Basilica. Okay, new guy, Gregory, decided upon leaders. The problem is with this guy, fled the city and hid in the forest until he was found and dragged back to Rome. He didn't want the job. So they found his rascal and they brought him right back and said, you got the job. So at any rate, he got the job, and Constantine notified an official. It was all taken care of by 590. This calamity brought Europe about. What happened is Europe grew after this. So now they're all thinking that this guy ran because he was supposed to have the job. He came back, didn't want the job, but Europe is doing really well under his tutelage. So, all right. So here you go. In the dark print there, Gregory, holding fast to his Lord's order, led to the epitaph God's counsel. It was a singularly appropriate description of a man who had exerted himself to the utmost to be solely God's while ruling church and world like a Roman statesman, the last of his line. So he was doing a good job, didn't want the job, but he actually did some beneficial things. After his death, he was considered Gregory the Great. You don't throw the great after somebody unless they were actually great and back in here. And they actually tied him to Augustine, Ambrose, and Jerome, all of which were fathers of the Christian church. Okay? So, at any rate, here's one of the things that took him early was he was happy as an ascetic monk, eating raw veggies and fruit, praying almost all night, wearing a hair shirt, throwing himself into Benedictine duties. His unceasing fasting ruined his digestion and paid havoc with his heart. So he didn't last that long. Okay, it was I guess his way of getting out was dying. Okay, so with Gregory, monasticism ascended to the papal throne. So what are we talking about? All these guys that were sequestered in caves now have a position of authority, and they're going to be stuck into positions of the church. All right, now you know all the weird things those guys were doing, but they were also copying scriptures. They were always copying scriptures, okay? He surrounded himself with monks. He made bishops and legates, confirmed the rule of St. Benedictine Council, did all these things. In other words, he caused monastic life to be elevated up to this level instead of everybody thinking there's a nut out there on a pole for 20 years feeding himself from a bucket and preaching from his pedestal. So it worked out that way. Now, here's the deal. He had some weird stuff going on. Adam's fall affected all his descendants, weakened but not destroyed their freedom of will. Thus, once man had been moved by grace, he may cooperate with it and win merit for himself by his good works. Son of a gun, they had to throw that in there, didn't they? But they do it all the time. I call that a twofer. You get saved and you get to do your good works, so you really feel good about yourself. Okay? In baptism, God grants forgiving grace freely without any merit on man's part. After baptism, sin must be dealt with a penance, simply a form of punishment inflicted by man himself instead of God. Now, have you ever seen, what was the ever-loving movie that they did with Tom Hanks? What was it? You know what I'm talking about? Where the guy was beating himself with the thingamajigger? Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know, but somebody was in it. Anyway, this guy was all whacked out, and he was one of those monastic guys. But his only way he could get closer to God was whipping himself with that cat o' nine tails and beating marks on his back. Well, that's what these guys were doing. Okay, that's how they played this game. And if I hammered myself hard enough, I was really close to God. Thinking I don't want to join that bunch, but you know how it is. So, here you go. Greater sins, more works, plus we must be more careful to avoid them in the future. That sounds like a simple plan. All right. Whether we have done enough to atone for them, here's the one that always put a big question mark on my page. We cannot know until after death. That's like Pelosi saying we had to pass it before we read it. I'm not quite sure how that works, but it seems like everybody pulls that out of a hat every now and again. All right. Fortunately, sinners have the help of saints. Boy, that was I'm glad of that. Kevin is just thanking his pig and chicken saint every day because he has that rascal to take him on a hard day. All right, here we go. But only martyrs can be your advocates. Now, what does that do with that page that you have that I told you the first line? What is one thing that they have just done with that statement right there? They have taken a martyr and replaced him to take Jesus out of the equation, because he's our intercessor, not that. But people didn't have enough knowledge to be able to square that away. All right. So Gregory encouraged collection and veneration, awe and respect, the holy remains of the saints and the martyrs. All right, now here you go. They're saving locks of hair from the martyrs, fingernails, toes, and pieces of clothing. So anything you could get off of a martyr, you hang on to it, because if you need it later on, I guess it's like a rabbit's foot. Okay. Kind of a tough way to win a battle, but that's waving a toe at somebody just doesn't really look that tough. So, but at any rate, but if that didn't work, sins could still be atoned in purgatory. You can't get away from that. All right, another place of purification and suffering. Supreme miracle, the Holy Eucharist. Here's the one that they still fight over. The communion with Christ, whose body and blood are really present in the bread and the wine. Intake will nourish and strengthen your spiritual life. All right, that one doesn't go away. It just kind of bobs up every now and again. I've seen it within the past 20 years again, coming up to the surface again. You know, they push it aside when people squawk enough, then it boils back up. So, at any rate, there's a little writing that Gregory did. You can read that, but understand something. These guys, by the time they're in the position of where they were, their thought processes were pretty twisted. I don't know what the position did to them, but it really hammered them, all right? Now, after all of this is going on, you've got Charlemagne coming into the scene. And it said in April 25th, 799, St. Mark's Day, Day of Repentance and Prayer, Pope Leo III leading a procession through Rome for God, blessing upon fields and harvest. All right? Armed men rushed the Pope, whisked him away to a Greek monastery. Armed men who were loyalists to the Pope went and snagged him, and what they had him for was because of perjury and adultery. But the Pope's supporters stole him back under the cover of darkness. So it was just trading the Pope here back and forth every now and again. All right. But after that little escapade, Leo decided he needed a little help. And he wanted to get the King of the Franks, Charles the Great. Now, we know Christ and the Lord run history. So for this guy to do this, completely disjoint from the 12-year-old boy that saw Boniface get killed when he was a missionary, if you could see all these things on a spreadsheet, you would see how the Lord is starting to put things together to bring people together to do things. And I want you to understand something. As much as you're reading all of this and studying all this, there were truly good things that came out of many of these items. You're kind of seeing the goofball stuff, but there are many things which is discipline and study and helps and things like that. And as we see before the end of this little shooting match, you're going to see schools are going to be developed because of this. These people actually did care. They just had a little weird way of showing it sometimes. All right. So at any rate, he asked Charles the Great to come and help him. Okay. Charles crossed the Alps in 800 with an army prepared to settle the Pope's problem once and for all. But the problem is the Pope took an oath during purging himself during the accusations. In other words, he took an oath that said he didn't do those nasty things that they kidnapped him for. Okay. For what that's worth. All right. So once he did that, kind of calmed everybody's nerves down a little bit. Charles came to St. Peter's on Christmas Day to worship. Pope approached him with a golden crown, placed it on Charles's head. All right, so now you've got the church giving somebody in the world something important. But the congregation cried out to Charles, the most pious, crowned Augustus by God, to the great peacemaking emperor, long life and victory. The Pope actually prostrated himself in front of Charles. So now you got the church bowing down to the governmental system. All right, Yahoo. We all know how well that works out. At any rate, these things were taking place, and in doing so, Christendom was unified, societal mingling of religion, and the concerns of earthly things, so that the eternal and the temporal were being commingled every day, all the time. All right. Now, here's a question. How did it happen? Kingdom is not the world. How did it become so much a part of this worldly power? I want you to pay attention to this. Persistence of an idea and the rise of a powerful kingdom. Can anybody say Bernie Sanders? Please understand this. This stuff doesn't change. It doesn't change at all. It just has new figureheads and new names. Okay? But the barbarians, much like they all like to do, at war much of the time, but men still long for unity. I don't know how that works. Here's a little flashback that you can read from the Franks under Clovis, and the fact that Pippin was one of the guys that was kin to Charlemagne. Pippin time had come, and now this is this is what they call Pippin the Shorter, or Short Pippin, or whatever. I'm not sure how they work them. They got different names all over the place. But at any rate, as Pippin comes in, one thing happens. Regal power exercised by the mayors of the palace. He turned to the Pope for a ruling stipulation that whoever had actual power should be the legal ruler. So now he's trying to wrestle the power away from the Pope. That's all he's trying to do. Okay? So you can see how that's going to fly. At any rate, the Pope 3 years later blessed this coup d'etat by crossing the Alps and personally appointing Pippin in an Old Testament manner as chosen of the Lord. So Rome's need to have somebody guard them was taken care of. But the problem was it was not a good program to put together. So the surface benefit in 751, the Lombards, German tribe who ruled Italy from 568 to 774, conquered the imperial territory of Ravenna. Okay, anybody that knows where Ravenna is now where Vatican City is. Okay, Yahoo. So at any rate, here you got a guy that just did some work. Following Pippin's coronation, the Pope secured promise of an armed intervention and pledged to give the papacy the territory of Ravenna once it was conquered. So as Pippin comes down and whoops up some people, and obviously this guy knew what this was, and he knew what he wanted, and he knew how he was going to get it. All he had to do was wait for the parts to fall in place, okay? So, at any rate, that took place. Frankish army forced the Lombard king to surrender. Pippin officially conferred Ravenna territory upon the Pope, and called the donation of Pippin. The gift made the Pope a temporary ruler of the Papal States. All right, Peter recovered his sword. Every time they got something good going on, Peter's thrown into the mix. Peter found his hat. Peter found his socks. Peter found his sword. I don't know, whatever Peter. Anytime Peter did something, it was really good. So just understand that's how they took care of this problem. All right. This alliance between Franks and the papacy affected the course of European politics and Christianity for centuries. This is why the Europe that we knew prior to our revolution was actually Christian. And it fell apart. Well, as we were going through our revolution, the French were going through their revolution, and their revolution became bloody and nasty. Ours became a little more organized and a little bit more beneficial. But it was still, one was moving towards the Lord, one was moving away. All right, so Europe was there for a long time, fell away by the 1700s, 1600s, okay? Excuse me. Only one significant step remained to restore Christian empire to the West, and it came to raise the power of the Pippin illustrious son, Charles. Okay? Known today as Charlemagne, Charles the Great. So, when Charles succeeded his father in 768, his mind was set with three goals. Military power to crush his enemies. You have to understand what's the mindset of all these Lombards and all these people. They're clans, they're wars, they're warriors, they like to take things, they like to break things, and they like to take people. So, number one on his list was to keep doing that. Only now he could do it with a halo over his head. That's the only difference, okay? So, religious power to direct his people's souls. Kevin, is that what you do on Sunday? Okay, I'm just checking. Okay. At any rate, intellectual power to instruct both souls and mind. That one is beneficial, by the way. Okay? Charlemagne's success creates Europe as a new world order, nominally Christian, for better or worse, for 1,000 years. Okay? So you can see where that comes up to. The victories that he had, you can see he was still a warring guy, pushed the Muslims back to the Ebro River, pushed the Bavarians as Saxons. Both were different tribes in Germany. It took 32 campaigns to do it. Very brutal in conquering and converting. Understand that converting? What was he converting them to? Come to Jesus or I'll cut your head off. It's pretty simple. That probably worked today pretty good too. So, but at any rate, so beat back the Slavs and the Avars, the Asiatic nomads related to the Huns in 6 campaigns. So all this stuff he's doing. Finally, the Lombards were defeated in 774 AD, and Charlemagne proclaimed himself king. So here's what's going on. Charlemagne's getting into a position where he can do his 3 things, all right? Now, while in Italy, he cemented his alliance with the Church of Rome by confirming the donation of Pippin. Now, what is the donation of Pippin? A little place called Ravenna. Okay? Purpose. Pope needed protection. Charlemagne needed divine sanctions. Okay, if you're going to go to war and wipe somebody out, it always helps to have the Pope say, go get them. That's a real benefit. Okay? So, here we go. He's off and running. In his dispatches, Charles, here's how he started all of his dispatches, by the way. Charles, by the will of God, Roman Emperor Augustus, in the year of our consulship, I am going to do something. So he made sure he put his title in there every time, so it was never questioned at all. Oath taken to him as Caesar, all officers, lay or ecclesiastical. Eastern Court, 1812, Emperor of Constantinople acknowledges him. So what does that mean? Now you got East and West talking. Okay? You got Rome and Constantinople. Now they're not divorced as much as they were. Now there's a conversation started. Question now becomes, should the state control the churches or the church rule the state? Continues through the Middle Ages. It's going to be a wrestling match, okay? So it's not any different anywhere along the line. There are some grumpier battles, there are some good times, and there are some things that come out of that are beneficial, but it was not an easy trip, okay? Charlemagne and his sovereignty were never left to doubt. Everyone was answerable to him. Even the Pope was observed by the king's envoys. So what it amounts to is he elevated himself above the Pope, kept him in good stead because he knew what he needed from him, but he also was stealing his power a little bit at a time. All right. Charlemagne decreed every monastery must have a school to educate boys in Oh, and singing, arithmetic, and grammar. Well, I can get some of those things done. The singing part would probably be a little rough around the edges. But the thing of it is what was he trying to do? Indoctrinate. Exactly. What was he going to teach them? What he wanted them to know. Hence, all the wonderful things you hear about Cuba having good reading programs. Yeah, okay. So understand, it's not any different anywhere. Now, the imperial ideal at the very bottom of the page, imperial ideal that he I don't even know what that word is. That is a weird word. Forgive me. Something persisted as a political force. Revived as revivic. I don't know. We'll just skip it and try to make a sentence out of it. All right. Political force in Europe until 1806. Now, do you see how long that is? That's a truckload of years, gang. That's 1,000 years. All right. When the Holy Roman Empire was terminated by another self-styled emperor, Yahoo, Bonaparte. All right.
Envisioned. I think the word is envisioned.
Envisioned? Do you have?
That he envisioned persisted.
Oh, good. Okay. That sounds like a nice place to put it. We won't have to worry about that one for 4 years, will we? All right. So, at any rate, so you can see now, as those things are taking place, one thing's going to happen once you start educating people. The decline of the feudalism is going to happen because there's a way of working things in the north, and then there's the church way. Okay, and the way in the north is the king does everything. He's got little people underneath him. Those people do something and keep everybody else in line. Well, that's going to kind of have a problem. Charlemagne's empire afforded no more than breathing space, territory for the vast nobility. Too powerful to be held together after dominating personality. So what's going to happen? He's going to do all this stuff, but he is the personality that's keeping it functioning. Okay? Just like anything else, when the guy that's running the show passes away, Apple. When Steve Jobs passed away, the new guy isn't Steve Jobs. So things change. Well, that's pretty much how it is down through history with all of these things. So understand that feudalism is something that took place in Germany and all these places, but you look at it and it's kind of a system of government, but it's really a loose system, okay? Feudalism, government in which the political power was exercised by the state. And you've got vassals, you've got fief, which is land. So you got guys that are in power, guys that are a little bit weaker. It's a caste system. It's a real ever-loving mess, okay? But the one thing that you'll pay attention to this is this next one here. It says, central to feudalism, a personal bond between the lord, which was the guy that's atop, and the vassal, which was the weaker lord, okay? Now, it's either somebody helped them along the way or somebody helped this guy get to this place, and he's taking care of those that got him there. But that system kind of kept it loosely structured, okay? But the problem is all of these things took land, people, money, and all of that kind of stuff. So you can see all the different things that are involved in now. The feudal contract, which they talk about in all these different books, if you broke a feudal contract, it was not good for you, okay? And I mean, a felony back then didn't mean you went, to Club Med. It meant generally you were dead by the end of the week, okay? Because they couldn't tolerate it because if too many people did it, then it was a problem. And they had to keep it squared away. So, at any rate, you can see here the Lord gives the vassal protection and justice. The vassal's duty was military service, devoted 40 days a year to the Lord with no pay. So there's all kinds of weird little catches and pulls. And the church pulled into the feudal system due to need for protection from the barbarians. So why did the church even entertain it? Because they couldn't have somebody sweeping in from the north and taking all their loot from Rome. That's all there is to it, period. So, at any rate, feudal barons in France and Germany, they always offering to do a job, okay? Bishops and abbots became vassals receiving land in which they were obligated to provide the usual feudal services. Problem, loyalty, no higher lords created unusual conflicts to bishops who looked at the Pope as anointed shepherd of the church. You got people that just have no clue what the flow chart is anymore, okay? Really. They see somebody at the top, but that guy's not at the top over here, but he's just over here. Well, this guy can be over top over here, but not over here. And it's a wrestling match, and it doesn't work well for anybody. So, at any rate, All of these guys are going to wrestle all the way to the 10th and 11th century, and then they finally started putting a kibosh on it, all right? German King Otto the Great revived the Roman Empire in 962. This renewal brought old rivalry back between church and state. Once a system collapses, something has to take place. If somebody knows what the old system was, they're going to try to install it before somebody else gets something new in there. All right? Otto claims to be a successor to Augustus, Constantine, and Charlemagne. I don't think he got an email to that effect. I think he just said it. Okay? And once you say something like that, what did they say back on the other page? If you say something persistently, it becomes the fact of the day. Okay? So that's all you got to do. Now, you can see here that with all these things being taking place, they assumed the bishop of the office of bishop and abbot had two things, spiritual and feudal. So there's a governmental side and a spiritual side, neither of which was legit. In reality, the lords and king controlled everything. They just took their little puppet guys out here and went like this. And then whatever they did is what these guys wanted done. So at any rate, working through that, with the dark print says some of the 300 Colonneck houses freed from the lay control of the 1059 AD papacy itself was removed from secular interference by the creation of the College of Cardinals. Now, do you see what they did to get rid of the influence of the outside world? They put it together with 300 of these guys, and they made a College of Cardinals. Now, what does everybody do when the College of Cardinals are meeting when a pope bites the dust? We're all waiting for what color smoke? White. Okay? Go figure. But at any rate, that came about right here. Okay? They have a system now where the outside world cannot interfere with what they're doing. And it makes them all happy for a while, all right? Until you find out some of those guys are crooked as a dog's hind leg. But that's beside the point, all right? Now, so you got a reform guy that shows up on the scene. Hildebrand was elected pope, and as Gregory V, he claimed unprecedented power of the papacy. So you got somebody else that wants a big power grab. And there was a problem between Gregory and this guy, and you can see the struggle. Now, in 1079, Henry, he's the one that blinks first, okay? The cast in the mountains of Italy, dressed as a penitent emperor, stood in the snow and begged for forgiveness for 3 days. So he stood for 3 days in the snow begging for forgiveness so that he could be put back in. Why? Because he was afraid to be excommunicated, afraid to be cut off, he'd be kicked out. Couldn't have any of those happening to the emperor. So he said, no big deal. You go right ahead and do it. Everything's fine and dandy. We're just happier than ever. All right? Emperor's humiliation was complete. The church power soared. So what happened? Emperor took a hit. Church goes up. That's all there is to it. Situation was resolved in 1022. Now the Concordat of the Treaty of Worms, okay? So I have no clue why they tagged it that way, but what happens is church can elect a holder of church offices, but only in the presence of the emperor or the representative of the emperor. So what did the emperor do? You guys go ahead and do your thing. Just give me a seat in the corner and let me sit there while you're doing it. Pretty much all he did, all right? So now you got the papacy is in a position of authority now, and any emperor has to kowtow to them. Now, this is when all the great churches were being built. This is when St. Peter's Basilica was built again, which took 120 years to build, by the way. And this is where everybody was enthroned, so to speak, with all their grand programs and such. So that's where this is going to take place. Now, and you look at this. I didn't even pay attention to the last time. Cathedral of Notre Dame was put together then. All right. Are they still working on that puppy?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
They're actually saying that they may not be able to.
I was going to say that. Well, it would surprise me if they could. I used to be in fire restoration, and that place was cooked pretty bad. There was not a lot of stuff left supporting anything, and it was all house of cards anyway with additions, so that wouldn't surprise me at all. So at any rate, you can see that what's going on now is you got cathedrals being built all over the place, and if you pay attention to any of the cathedrals, you pay attention to the detail. Everything down below is real nice and foo-foo-y, but if the closer you get to the top of the cathedral, you're going to see more intricate, detailed work. Of course, you can't see it, but who can? God. Okay, so the detail increases the closer you get to God. All right, so kind of a neat little program they had going on. In other words, what's happening is papacy's going up and the empire's coming down. All right, here you go. Terms used: truly universal monarchy become more centralized. All bishops swear to fealty to the Pope. No religious orders formed without his authorization. Papal court in Rome hears all appeals from all over Christendom. Every country legates from Rome oversee execution of papal orders. A legate is a law officer of the church. Whatever the Pope says, they go and take care of it, okay? Strong Pope necessary for total control. Pope Innocent was one of the tough ones. Administrator Pope, he was a lawyer. He was a canon lawyer, okay? Not a monk. All right, moon gets light from the sun, so kings derive power from the Pope. I'm not sure how that little program works, but by golly, it probably looked good on your business card, okay? So, at any rate, the tool that they like to use without too much lapse of time is excommunication, anathema, and thus deprivation of a person of grace for salvation, all right? So anybody that was excommunicated couldn't get saved. Well, I was fired. What's that mean? At any rate. So you got that going on. Interdict aimed at the whole nation to suspend public worship with the exception of baptism and the unction sacraments. Anointing due to illness or close to death. It withdrew all sacraments from the land of the disobedient rulers. So what's he doing? He's cutting them off from anything spiritual. Trying to crush their spirits is what he was trying to do. He was very successful at doing so. Okay. So successful was Innocent in that he actually, in all of these things taking place, the temporal and spiritual supremacy, he was forming knowledge of the feudal lord. In England, King John had a different archbishop than Innocent III. All England was placed under the interdict of King John was excommunicated. I don't think it bothered John that much. John capitulated to the Innocent of becoming his vassal and received England back as a fief and paying a large side of tribute. And what happened was, something took place. John didn't like it, so Don just sent him a check. Okay? And everything was fine. He wasn't going to kowtow. He just did what he knew would keep him quiet for a while. In France, you had the same problem going on. Innocent forced King Philip Augustus to comply with the church moral code by taking back his queen. So, yeah, he said, you can't have her anymore. Bring her back. She's broke. All right? So, at any rate, the woman he had divorced with the consent of French bishops. All of these things are just so odd. In the Holy Roman Empire, Innocent intervened in civil war for the throne. First he supported one, then the other. So what it was, he was all over the map. Popes of these centuries, 12th had the Crusade, 13th scholasticism, claimed power over the holy cause in history and maintained authority over the souls of men, even into eternity. Okay, that's how powerful these guys thought they were. Now, as these things are taking place, understand something. A little guy came onto the scene back in 570 called Muhammad. And he was the fly in the ointment for many, many, many years. Okay? But when the Crusades started cranking up, they reflected Christianity in another position of strength. Okay? But the strength was kind of convoluted because the strength was derived from telling somebody something that wasn't true to make them go do something that was physically at the time impossible. They didn't call them the Islamic hordes for nothing. They were everywhere and they could do a lot. And they swept into an area and decimated it, okay? So they had to figure some way to get all the people on board for this, and this is what's about to come up. Islam had come to birth through visions and revelations claimed by the Prophet Muhammad, okay? You understand the two sects, Shia and Sunni over there. Do you realize what the argument is? Do you know why those two groups argue? One is bloodline. Yeah, and the other is not. Right. He thinks it. Yes, correct. And that's the only thing it's the Hatfields and McCoys all over Heckenback. Okay. So at any rate, at the age of 25, he went from keeper of camels to overseeing business affairs of a wealthy widow. All right. This is just fill-in information. She was impressed by his character, though 15 years his senior, and soon proposed marriage to him. Only after she died did he take numerous wives. After 40, Muhammad goes monastic. Okay. Scouted out a cave, started to meditate and contemplate. In the cave, he had been visited by an angel that ordered him to recite, and from that command came the Quran. Okay? What was Joseph Smith? What did he do in his cave? He saw an angel too. Okay, I just want to say they're all drinking the same stuff. Okay, just so you know. At any rate, in doing these, he said it perplexed by it all. His wife told him he could well be the call of God upon him. Surprise! She became his first follower, and then a handful of family members. So he kind of stumbled into the position that he has gained now. Many resisted his claim. Only after various battles, arguments, and wars, okay, that Muhammad was able to gain the vast following of Arabia. All right. First 100 years of the Arabic movement, capitals fell: Jerusalem, Damascus, Cairo, to Islam. Now, as they fall, Christianity's getting pinched. Okay. Israel's getting pinched. The people that were coming to the wall, the Wailing Wall, they were being killed on the way by Muslim who would sweep in from the countryside and kill them on their way. All right? And you have to understand, when people come to the wall, they come with cash. Okay? Same thing when you go to St. Peter's Basilica, you come with cash. All right? That's how you get things moving in the spirit world, in case you didn't know. Just trying to help you, Kevin. Okay? So, at any rate, that you have to understand that. So, here we go. Unexpected death in 632 left a vacuum. No successor was named, so struggles developed. Here you go. Sunnis insisted caliph should be elected. Shias or Shiites argued the successor should come from Muhammad's bloodline, which would have been Ali, his cousin and brother-in-law. Now, man, I had to put my little thing in. I'm sorry. I was just reading a lot of different things. I guess they never really worked it out. Okay. So whatever took place at that little meeting back there at 632 is still on the table and gets brought up pretty regular at turkey dinners, okay? So at any rate, Pope Urban fans the flames. Now the Crusades come about due to Islam conquering much of the Holy Land. Christians sought to do something about it. Now the only thing they could think of was military conquest to preserve their geographic strongholds from being overrun. Why do they have that mindset? They have that mindset because they went up into Germany and took the Goths, the Visigoths, the Lombards, and all those people that knew how to fight and inculcated it into their program. And now when something needs to be done, what do? They don't go to the Bible. They don't go to God. They don't go to Christ. They go to military because that's what was put in there. That's their mindset, okay? It doesn't surprise you when you start reading some of the things these people did, okay? By the 8th century, the 700s, half of all Christians lived under Islamic rule. That's hard to believe. All right? But in 1096 AD, First Crusade, Peter the Hermit leads it. Okay, you have to remember what Peter the Hermit was. He was one of them guys that came out of a cave and decided he was going to do something special. But anyway, he ended up going military. All right? So, in 1126, it was the 6th and 7th Crusades, inspired by Louis the Ninth of France. In 270, the 8th Crusade Minor caused for fighting. Pilgrim encounter persecuted on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Trivia. Battle cry for this was Deus Vult, God wills it. Crusade mean take the cross on the way to the Holy Land. Here's what I told you before. Crusade cross was worn on the front. Journey home, the cross was worn on the back, if you lived. Okay? That was how you knew whether somebody was coming or going. Go off to the Crusades, it was a package deal. Go fight these guys and the spiritual reward and material gain. So you had forgiveness of all their past sins. Okay? So if you were really not a nice person and you went to the Crusades, you came back, Mr. Clean. That's all there is to it. And they bought it hook, line, and sinker. I would too. I mean, nobody taught me any different. I didn't know Greek then. Okay? So it's really amazing what they got away with. So you go off when you go off to these things, now Augustine had a just war. Okay, that's what Augustine called it. All right. Pope Urban and the popes that followed had a new type of war. It was called a holy war. Now, what moniker did Muslims pick up? They have a holy war. Right. They liked the term, so they snagged it for their own. Okay? And who are they always after? The infidels. Anything changed that you can see? Not a whole heck of a lot. Okay. All right. So, collateral damage of the Crusade, Jews and Christians. Okay, they're the ones that took a hit. All right. Because what would happen, they would come together, and they would come together in an area where these people were, and when the fighting was over, one side won, but everybody in between them were gone, either driven out or killed. So it's not the best way to do business. All right, here you go, which is absolutely normal. Some crusaders became mercenaries, killing anything that moved. And then they became plunderers and cannibalized the Muslims. Okay, first crusade, most successful of 5,000 knights and infantry overcame Turks and recaptured Jerusalem. All right, all of these things that you see taking place are all beneficial. And here's the contemporary account of what takes place. Some of our men had cut off heads of their enemies. Others shot with arrows. They fell from towers, tortured them longer, and cast them into flames. In other words, there was not a really, there were no rules, so to speak. Okay. Now, at nightfall, the Crusaders' hands were still bloody when they folded them in prayer and knelt at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. One nice thing you can see here, city falls again in 1291 to the Muslims. So it was one lost, one lost, one lost. Okay? Sign of the Crusades, corruption became apparent. Popes needed money for legates. Okay? Clergy, cardinal representing the Pope to govern the new land. Spiritual benefits turned into money-making advantages, okay? Sins had to be confessed to be forgiven. Upon guilt being forgiven, a penalty of satisfaction was to be exacted for the mark of sincerity. So if you gave $10, you weren't that sincere. If you gave 1,000, you were truly sincere. Period. I mean, have you ever gone into a mechanic and you see the sign on the wall and it says $25 an hour, if you help $35 an hour, and if you just watch me, it's $50. Okay, I think there must have been a sign on every cathedral and every basilica that said, really bad sins, here's the amount. If you got just a couple of little dinkers, you can get this amount. It didn't matter. They were going to make money one way or the other. It didn't matter to them at all. It was beyond what was taking place. So, at any rate, if a penitent died before performing an act of penance, purgatory was afforded to him after death. So, if you died before you paid your bill, that's what sent you to purgatory, by the way. Okay? And the reason that it sent you to purgatory is because they could exact money from your family to get you out of purgatory. It was like the gift that keeps on giving. Okay? And that's basically what they did. And I don't know when, have they stopped? Some people say they have, some people say they haven't. So I don't know whether they're still playing that little rascal or not. I know my wife's mom, I was really the black sheep of the family because I stole somebody from the belief system and made him a Baptist. That was even worse. Okay? And she wouldn't talk to me for a long time because of that. But being the nice person that I am, I won her over. Okay. Besides that, I knew how to do a lot of things she needed done and nobody else did. So that really helped a lot too. So at any rate, it worked out fine. So, but with all of that going on, you can see Urban II offered indulgence for total remission of sin to the Crusaders. And then you can see here, it was only a slight step further to confer the benefits upon those who were unable to go to the Crusades, who contributed to the cause by being bought as a substitute. Dan is going to pay Big Scott to go to battle for him. So Scott gets some of the benefits, but since Dan paid for him to go, he gets some of the benefits too. So just a really good package deal, So it's really looking good. So at any rate, you got Saladin, the Sultan of Egypt, became the new energetic leader of the Muslims. I remember reading about him. And the new terms of the city of Muslim was jihad, the holy war against Christians. But he remained a patient statesman. Proposed Richard the Lionhearted should marry his sister and give Palestine as a wedding gift. Now, how many times have you seen where Palestine came from? Okay? I remember them telling me, reading at different times that there really was a place called Palestine. Well, I'm pretty sure that Goliath was hanging around Palestine, if I'm not mistaken. but somebody was peddling it back and forth and using it as a pawn, and this guy was doing so. So, at any rate, one good thing is Richard the Lionhearted said, that's a non-starter for me. Okay, so he didn't buy into that program. And Richard the Lionhearted is the one that you see in England with all the, with all the Camelot movies and all that kind of stuff. Richard the Lionhearted was the guy that brought England back from the precipice too. Okay, so he was a good guy. After fighting for 3 years, Richard and Saladin agreed on a 3-year truce, free access to Jerusalem for Christians. Now, Fourth Crusade, zeal was fading as papal aspirations became apparent to the Crusaders. In other words, somebody got the idea that they were getting paid to fight, and they weren't crazy about it. So, at any rate, now we can really stop there. I guess that's probably safe to say we can stop, and we'll start with the result of the Crusades. But if you look at the very last thing here, the era of the Crusades ended in 1291 when Arsi, the last stronghold of the Christians in the Holy Land, where Jesus walked, fell to those who denied his deity, the Muslims. Okay, so the Crusades was just a blip on the screen, really and truly. It tried to eliminate something. I don't know how you eliminate something that is really being run by the guy that runs this world. I don't see any way to possibly do that, in all sincerity. History doesn't show that it ever takes place. And, the more I study this, the more I understand why you told us right from the get-go that the church started here, and it's just slowly going down here until Jesus Christ comes back. Because there's just too many things shooting at it, too many, and why there's always just a little cluster of Christians everywhere, because it's not something that's ever going to be flourishing. I was always curious as to why the Baptists thought that they could get everybody saved by the year 2000. I didn't understand the arrogance of it, and when I asked the question, they didn't like me asking the question, so that probably didn't make me favorite on that little table. But the thing of it is all you have to do is look at this and see how man has taken those 4 tenets that you saw at the beginning of this, of repent, follow me, spread the gospel, and go out to the whole world. They are so far from that on all these pages that it just amazes me that it can, I don't know how it keeps going. I truly don't. Because Christ said he's going to keep it going, and the gates of hell aren't going to prevail against it while he's not here. Well, that's the only ticket I can think of. So, any questions? You got a couple minutes. I don't want to burn your time. Did I do okay? Staying behind the